I mean, you look at that title and you wonder what this guy's up to. It's to say things that profound is something of question. If you look at me on the stage, I don't quite look like the techie. The other confession I'll make, not cognitive, at least as a physician. I was a surgeon. In fact, they wouldn't even let us get into the Royal College of Physicians. They sent us to go work with the barbers. So when you start looking at what this is about, it really is a story of medicine in general, global medicine, that's predicated on not looking at the development of a new drug or the new type of surgical technique. But what I want to talk to you about are when things profoundly changed in medicine. And I think we're on the cusp of something now. And I want to share that with you and show you where that is demonstrating itself. And so let's start with this. All right. First major profound change in medicine occurred in 3000 BC. And it was the development of surgery. And what was profound about it was that all of a sudden the role of the physician changed from being somebody who was to provide comfort and support to somebody whose disease was putting them in decline, to instead intervening for the purpose of cure. That was a mindset change in medicine. The second mindset change that you see occurring is when people started to recognize the importance of studying disease. Now, Hippocrates is given credit, and rightly so, for developing medical ethics. But he also deserves credit for helping to classify disease. And by classifying disease, trying to predict what kind of disease process is going on, but also to start looking at, for a given class of diseases, what are we going to do about it? And when you start looking at this classification, I guess you could describe Hippocrates as the father of ICD-10. But the final change, or the most recent change, is when we started to take a model of disease, an understanding of disease, and go from the organ system level down and bring it down to the molecular level. For instance, we used to talk about lung cancer. Well, lung cancer is really, when you start looking at the genetic variation amongst patients' tumors who have, the lung cancer tumors, you see it's really a collection of about 45 different diseases. At least 45 have been demonstrated to date. And so we're not dealing with one disease. We're dealing with a cluster of diseases that have the same shell. And the promise is if you know more about the molecular nature of what's causing a disease, then you may be sharper in terms of picking your approach to dealing with that disease. So you start looking at the modern physician now with all of the technology, and as you heard in Dr. Sawyer's panel, all of the connectivity that could exist, physicians are going to get overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed. Think about it. You go walk out on the floor, you see these continuous EKG monitors, and you start realizing, do I really want to know every beat of my patient? Or do I want to be clued in when those beats look aberrant? And under what circumstances? So, while we have proven our ability to generate, collect, and to distribute data, things don't change until you convert that data into actionable knowledge. And so what stands in front of us now is that as we've become more sophisticated at the molecular, or we're becoming more sophisticated about the molecular level of disease and its importance in terms of choosing therapy, we need to have tools that are going to help physicians to make sense out of that data and make great decisions. So let's talk about 4 areas where I believe we're going to see profound change. And I mentioned these yesterday. But the areas that are important are 4 things that I think we're seeing. Number 1, an ability to be faster and more precise in the identification of a diagnosis. Second, because we're more precise about the nature of the disease at the molecular level, that promises for us an ability to create life science solutions, new drugs, new biologicals, new surgical procedures, etc., to make us more effective. And because of our mastery of data, the potential to do even faster, more effective research on the development of those things, getting the cost of R&D down. Third thing is decision support. Translated, better planning about care. Decision support tools for both consumers in that room, the patient and physician. All right? And then the final thing is improved patient engagement, because you're able to track that patient's performance when they're not in your office, but without being overwhelmed by every fact that gets generated. So let's go into this a little special. When you start looking at improved diagnosis, you start looking at what technology's allowed us to do, to start following people into their home, to start watching them on the road, to start watching them living day-to-day life's activities. The ability to start using things like otoscopes that are held by mom to a child's ear to support somebody going on through the variety of other capabilities in terms of virtual visits and the like. And finally, MRIs to help us look at brain function when a given drug is being rendered. The next thing is being able to find new drugs. You know, when we started talking about HER2 for treatment of breast cancer, the drug came about 20 years after they found the gene, or actually the gene's product. But we start looking at the next go-around with Hep C, that time cycle for development between the time that the virus was fully genetically understood and the drug was cut in half. Now you look at cholesterol management drugs with these PCSK9s. We got 3 of them within the course of 6 months, meaning that the development time has become even shorter. That's the promise of what technology and these diagnostics and molecular basis allows us to do. The next area, though, is making the right decisions. And this is one of the most promising things that are out there. However, one of the things to keep in mind is just because you see a genetic defect doesn't mean you can jump over the clinical testing to see whether or not something works. What do I mean by that? You're seeing a lot of pressure being put out there now that if a colon cancer has a type of mutation and we see the same mutation in a lung cancer, that you can automatically use the colon cancer drug to treat the lung. That's not going to happen, not without clinical testing. What the promise is being more precise about the therapies, but you still have to do the clinical trials to prove that your hypothesis that a given genetic mutation makes sense, all right? So despite all the hoopla around using genetic sequencing to figure out what your cancer is, your cancer treatment should be really guided by clinical testing. The drugs used in that clinical testing should be using genetic markers to determine which drugs to put in a clinical trial. But don't skip over clinical trials, and physicians owe that clinical ethic, that medical ethic to their patients. Final piece is your connectivity, the ability to follow somebody home, The ability for a simple Bluetooth scale to follow a congestive heart failure patient home, resulting in a 28% reduction in readmissions, unplanned readmissions, because you're able to follow patient progress, is real. The ability for you to communicate with your patient is something that becomes real, and to do it asynchronously so that you're able to have this done in a way in which it's convenient for both parties, and then to be able to collaborate amongst you, your partners, the institutions that have served your patients, as well as the patient, just as Dr. Sawyer was leading up to. And so let me just finish up then by once again reiterating the areas in which we are seeing profound change has been enabled by technology. We can diagnose faster. We can come up with better solutions much quicker. We can make better decisions at the time the patient's being treated. And finally, we have the ability to see that what we had done works, both because patients have been adherent, as well as you can see that the progress is being made. And with that, I thank you.